Hello, everyone. We're Sky and Mackayla, and today we welcome Mike and Ben from Ginkgo Balboa to the soundtrack of our lives. They're here to tell us about their new EP, how it was to produce, and what we can expect from it. So, welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Of course.
We're so stoked to be here. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, of course. So, do you guys want to start by telling us how do you guys started this band, I guess, or group? And where did the name came from?
Sure. Ben, I'll take this one if that's cool. So, to sum it up in not so many words, we met both having an events industry job that was very music oriented back in 2018 and just vibed. Our whole team did, but Ben and I especially, just having the same interests musically, and a good friendship was created first, and then from there we were able to jam and understand each other's musical tastes, and we one day were like, why don't we do something together? And that's kind of how that came about. Ginkgo Balboa was one of those band names from a list. We just kind of made a list of different names that we thought would be cool to possibly explore and indie without being pretentious, hopefully. And Ginkgo Balboa was one that Ben had come up with before we met, which is kind of cool. And I was like, well, there's Balboa Boulevard, which is in the valley, the San Fernando Valley, where we both live. So that's cool. And, Rocky Balboa. It's just fun to say.
Yeah, we really enjoy doing sort of play on words with obviously you Ginkgo Balboa, which is the tree, and then you got Rocky Balboa. So yeah, it's a little play on words. You'll hear some of you'll probably see or hear some of those things a few times in the lyrics from time to time. So yeah, something we like to do.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you said that you met through your job. Can you speak a little bit more about how you decided to come together and what that was like?
Yeah.
Well,
go ahead.
Well, in that role, we were touring already. We were, with what we were doing, we were kind of having almost like a music life, but from the perspective of a roadie. So we kind of had to get along. We had to vibe. So that was the trial period of things that we knew, well, if we were going to make music together and pursue it professionally, these are the things we would have to deal with. It was just, we although our tastes were very, very different, we didn't know if we can come together in a business partnership where it would actually work and thrive, but it's been able to.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things that we were doing was it was a lot of heavy lifting, a lot of logistics for this. But it was a beer and music fest, and then we just kind of sort of realized early on in our meeting with each other that we lived not too far from each other, like within a few miles from each other. And when you meet somebody in LA at, say, a job, and then you meet somebody who's lives a couple miles away from you, it generally is kind of a surprising thing, because most people usually live still pretty far away from you. And so both of us, and then we had another friend who was with us, who they both lived in the same apartment building, and they knew each other and they were friends and stuff before this. And we just kind of became friends first, I guess, and started talking more about music and the arts, and realized that we both sort of have a love for it, and let's try this. Mike had done hip hop and poetry in the past, and I was sort of I was a musician, had been a musician for a while, and it just kind of was, we were just kind of sitting around thinking, why aren't we sort of, we both have these talents, which most of our friends do, but we both have these talents. Why aren't we, sort of utilizing them together, let's make something cohesive out of, basically talents.
And in the past, I've come so close to I'm sure Ben has these experiences too, where it's like people say something and they're like, in theory they want to create something, especially with music. It's one of those things where you meet a lot of people who are just so go with the flow that when it comes to actually making things happen and not just jamming all the time, it's hard to do so. So yeah, I wanted to make like a Beastie Boys type trio 10 years ago with I had someone else in mind, and then he was like, "Oh, I didn't realize you were serious." And I was like, "Well, what are we doing this for?" That would happen time and time again with different
Yeah.
outfits, and Ben and I had that frustration, although he had been on record labels before and more success there. But yeah, so we were just like, "Oh, I guess this other person isn't all talk about actually pursuing this." So yeah, it all stemmed from frustration, but also like creative integrity, I would say.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I wasn't even planning on really playing music live at that point. I hadn't really any aspirations on going back to music because I was in music for a long time, did the whole touring thing, and kind of moved out to California with my then wife, and it was basically all about film at that point. So I've been in the film industry, and basically, yeah, it wasn't until meeting Mike when we basically got this idea to go back into music. So here we are. But music obviously is the love of my life. So I don't really have any regrets about it. So
That's good.
yeah.
So how do you guys decide what like type of music you guys wanted to make? Because you mentioned like hip hop and poetry, and what you guys are making right now, it's not hip hop and it's not,
Yeah.
Yeah,
neither one of us really come from this background. I come from a bit of a metal and math rock background too. So we going into something a lot poppier, a lot more dance oriented, was definitely, I outside of, I can only speak for myself, but it was outside of my comfort zone at the time. Although I, was we were really into all that, I guess dancey, poppy music still, but had always tried to, sort of write poppier music by myself, and always did. But then again, I have this sort of experimental background, so those experimental roots sort of always creeped in, and I think they kind of do with Ginkgo Balboa as well. I think it has a chance to, a tendency to get more experimental than I think we may get credit for. But yeah, where were we going with this? Mike, did you have anything to add?
Sure, yeah. We're all on our first cup of coffee, right? I most certainly am.
It's exactly what it is.
Yeah, it was the genre, dance music, and the 80s especially was a private love of mine back in high school. It wasn't something I would talk about with my friends because, yeah, it was all Tupac and Biggie, and then some of the new hip hop of the time, and slam poetry and stuff. It was very angry and angsty, as you'd probably expect from someone of that age. So anytime I was vibing out to Phil Collins or something, I was like, just enjoying the minutia of the music privately. So it was something that I feel like was building for me to a certain extent. I had this trio. We did one record when I was living in New York City. I had some friends there that I made this one like acoustic record with, and that guy, it was two guys and a girl, and the other guy in that group, I'll shout him out, Eric Skelton from Our Friend Mary. He lived in Greenwich Village, and he had this incredible setup where we would mostly electronic, where we would make these sounds and stuff. And I would at first do the same thing that how Ben and I started, where he would make the music and I would just come up with these different vocal trills over it and see where it would go. But it was one of those things where he didn't have the time, the time to go forward and pursue it in a bigger capacity. So that was after years of just becoming more involved with that genre from a fan standpoint. I think it was like the early 2010s when the breakout of M83 to Mac DeMarco to Broncho, like all those different bands. I was just like, oh, I'm more of an indie person. Like, not that you have to identify with one as like your musical tattoo, but I was like, I think this is more my vibe. It's more inclusive and more relaxed oftentimes. And so then it just kind of became my thing. And then so yeah, it was just a matter of time, at least for me.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, it's kind of I don't know. It's always kind of funny when people start making music that it's not, like related to what they've done before or what they usually listen to. So it's interesting to see.
Yeah, I think like growing up, music was such a divide, not divisive. That's not the best word, but it was it really kind of helped sort of compartmentalize people in a way, because where I come from, you had your metalheads and you had your hip hop guys and you had your indie rockers and the emo kids, and they there would be some overlap there, obviously. And I think back, deep down inside all of us, there was always overlap. We always like pretty much all types of music. I think that's kind of, I think we sort of put these, we put these dividers on us, I think, but I think nowadays it's so much more different. Almost have these I've heard the non-genre word kind of creep into conversations, which is basically like you hear a lot of, even in indie rock, you'll hear hip hop undertones and vice versa. Even hip hop nowadays, hip hop's gotten to that age now where it's a little bit older now, and it's getting to the age where it's starting to do a lot more experiments. I think I feel like we have more freedom, musicians do these nowadays to kind of feel free to sort of not feel pigeonholed into one particular genre, and so that was kind of the underlining point that I wanted to make.
So, you guys have an EP called Balloon Duty that is coming out on July 28th.
Yeah, very
Yeah.
excited about that.
So, what are the main themes explored in it, and what can we expect from it?
It's the same chill vibe that we've been associated with since we've started, but there's a little bit more introspection, a little bit more vulnerability to it. That's why, right, the Balloon Duty is a double entendre, because it is what it sounds like on its face. Like, here's someone who has to bring the party, like they're the proverbial host, like the good time, they're on balloon duty, better make sure everybody has fun, that sort of thing. But there's also
sort
like
of a euphemism for the guy that brings the drugs, but not really.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but there's also the side of it where it's like, there's other things, the tears of a clown thing. Oh, there's other things that we can talk about, or other feelings. And Tie Me Down, the first single that came out just, well, a little over a week ago today, as of this recording, I think it's a good representation, right, Ben, of that like whole thing, because it's very poppy and upbeat, but the lyrics there's a little bit of, it's triumphant, but it's a little bit melancholy too.
I think like you hit it nail on the head with the vulnerability thing, and there's a lot of, like he said, there's a lot of metaphor inside in Balloon Duty, with the clown, all the way from the visuals to a lot of the lyrical content and even the musical content. There's a lot of things represent things. The clown sort of represents sort of a certain personality that's in all of us, which is sort of that guy that's supposed to bring the party in a way. And then there's also sort of this feeling that we all have, especially in the COVID era, of just sort of letting people down, just to kind of target one particular emotion for it. It's we sort of have this, and not to sort of give away, because I like to have people sort of interpret it in their own way, so I don't like to harp on what it means for us too much. But for us, we've talked about it, and one of the deciding factors of using the clown idea and the ocean idea is sort of just like this it's almost like the aftermath of you almost have to picture like the aftermath of you know, you have a clown in the picture. There's a helium tank but no balloons, you know, and so there's the fact that it's called balloon duty and there are no balloons, that in and of itself right there is sort of symbolic. You know, sort of saying, well, you know, I'm the clown, I'm supposed to bring the balloons, you know, this is and I didn't, you know, almost like sort of the aftermath of a really bad event that was supposed to be fun or something, you know. And then there's a lot of other different little things that we sort of splashed in there. But that'll be left to the interpreter, I suppose, for the most part.
Yeah, just to build on that for a second, the COVID thing, we feel forever tied with COVID, I think, because, you know, we were starting right before it, getting our album, our first EP mastered right before things hit. So it felt like, well, maybe we could break out as one of those anonymous COVID bands, or like, you know, just Spotify, like a Spotify band or whatever.
Every
But
song has a cough
yeah,
track,
so
you know,
to
instead of a laugh track.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So, you know, we feel indebted to the virus. Wait, that doesn't make sense. Just kidding.
I owe a lot
No,
to
we
COVID.
feel, yeah. The references are there. Definitely the balloon duty thing is just like, because we're still in Los Angeles, we're still going through it where like things have not healed
Yeah.
the way we wanted them to. You know, we almost booked a tour for this summer where half the venues that we would have played aren't even existing anymore. So it's like there's a lot of devastation there. But I digress.
Yeah. So how long did it take you to create the album?
Balloon duty. Well, you know, that's a funny story because, you know, from its conception, or at least from the idea of the EP's conception, right? Because the songs we had sort of written, not in their entirety, we really kind of cleaned a lot of them up. A lot of these songs some of these songs anyways, tended to be ones that we were going to put, you know, we were going to release earlier on and just kind of sort of hit a creative rut on, and maybe wanted to shelve the song for a minute because, you know, we just thought that maybe there were more elements or whatever that needed to go in it, or just some cleanup to the song itself. And so a lot of these songs are sort of I guess they sort of tell a story from the perspective of someone during COVID, just because most of these songs were written during COVID. And so you have the common theme on all these songs sort of is that at least we have this feeling. I don't know if it's going to be reached by anybody else, but, you know, we sort of have this it's sort of emblematic of our times anyways during the COVID era. But I don't know, the idea for the EP was conceived maybe a year ago. Does that sound about right?
Yeah,
Where we were
right.
going to, you know, normally, you know, we sort of just release a song every quarter or whatever, you know, every 3 months or so. And we just sort of had I think there was also sort of a small sense of urgency, because we were starting to kind of get a little, we were spending a lot of time focusing on trying to find a band to play and play live and do a lot of live shows, that we sort of, the writing process kind of started to take a little lull. And so I think I think we were kind of made the decision because we were just kind of, it was getting down to the wire. We hadn't released anything in a while, and we didn't want to just release one song when we have this sort of backlog of songs. And so we, among, you know, we have 6 songs on this demo, and I think there were about 12 songs or so for us to sort of choose from for this demo that kind of all sort of fit into the, you know, they sort of fit into the right theme, at least in our minds. And a lot of those songs, another reason why we sort of use sort of our backlog of songs, or, you know, took from sort of a backlog of songs that were on the back burner for a while. that we always wanted to keep in rotation because we liked them. We always liked those songs, you know.
Yeah, we knew it was about time, like to release another EP, right? It had been long enough since the first one.
Okay. So what is your like creative and production process?
Well, the songwriting process for us starts in the studio. So we don't really actually as a band come together and, you know, put together, you know, write songs. So most of the time it you know, it starts in the studio, and it usually, well, every song has a different sort of way that we write it, I guess. There's sort of a few different sort of methods, I suppose, that we use to write these songs. In terms of like, we like to also sort of stick with the same sort of base layer of instruments. So you know, a lot of what we do is it's all digitally created instruments, software instruments, and we like to keep them, you know, generally I use native plugins, native instruments to Ableton. Ableton's our DAW. That's the one we use. And generally I like to stick with a lot of the native stuff. I don't really mess around with a lot of aftermarket plugins, although there are a few that we kind of mess with. But then you get into this whole vulnerability of, you know, certain plugins just don't. This is tech talk, but certain plugins just aren't compatible with certain DAWs after a certain time, you know, because, you know, everything updates. But try to stay along those lines. Now with this EP, we did experiment with different sounds and stuff, and that wasn't always the case. Some of these songs, they started out sounding a little bit more like, let's say, the first EP, but one of the things that we did to try to, you know, make some of these songs, the reason why we sat on them for so long is because maybe, you know, there were certain times when just the instrument that we're using, just, it might have sounded right, or it might have sounded like an instrument that we had used in the past, which is part of what we do, but it also just didn't come together well with the song. So we then started experimenting with different sounds, different instruments, and this EP, I think, really kind of sort of dives into a sort of new aspect of what we're about, you know, and sort of we experiment with different sounds in this EP.
Yeah, I usually trust his composition process and then come in later after he's made a prototype of what we could work on. But there'll be sounds where it's like, no, it doesn't sound like us, or this is too repetitive, or, you know, we're an open book with each other about it. But unless there's like I want to say like a whole playlist of new songs that I'm vibing out on, or like we should do something like this, obviously not, you know, it's just inspiration, you know, you know, I'll send that and be like, oh yeah, what if we, you know, this one should be really bass heavy. Like, think about how you can feel that you would put cans on, and it's like, oh, that's a larger than life feeling. Can we do that too? But mostly Ben just comes up with these really musically articulate ideas, and they're fun and memorable. So
yeah, that is one of the ways that we write some of our songs. You know, oftentimes, you know, and this is sort of even before nonlinear music editing. One of the ways that at least I would write a song would generally, I found that when I was, you know, very young and learning how to play music, even, I would just really just kind of cover a song. You know, I would play my favorite songs that I would, you know, that I wanted to learn. And then from there, I would actually teach myself new and interesting riffs, you know. And so that way of writing music has never really ended. I've always used, you know, other songs that are inspiring me to write the songs that I'm writing. And sometimes I'll even cover that song now with nonlinear editing and DAWs. I can actually perform that song. I can actually cover that song, write a version of, a cover version basically of a song. And then just kind of from there, I have sort of a backbone of a song, and can really kind of go from there and change things around. And yeah, that's one of the ways of doing it. Another way we do it is just, playing around with something until something sticks, until you hear something that really kind of turns on a light bulb for you, which happens a lot, and then next thing you know, when that happens, the creative juices just sort of start flowing.
Yeah, and then very quickly, the opposite version of that is, so we have a single called Beach with My Lover, which isn't on Balloon Duty. It came out back in February 2023, but it was one that, so the first peg, it was a melody that I came up with, and a vocal melody, and then I from there just used the piano to make a rudimentary melody back in May 2021, and sent that, tried to make as much of an exoskeleton as I could for Ben's convenience, to see first that he even liked it and wanted us to work with it, and then to see what he thought we could do with it. And so there are some examples where, musically, I'll do something first and then give it to him to make it really, really pretty, but it's usually just like he's left to his own devices with the music that he wants to create, and then we kind of go from there. But with Beach with My Lover, in my head, I envisioned a very, very like thumpy house bass. And we said, well, let's do this instead. We want to use a real bass. We kind of compromise on certain things. And I'm bringing that up, Ben, as an example, just to show that we're always keeping each other in check to make sure everything is the Ginkgo Balboa sound, whatever we consider that to be, and how are we going to perform it live.
Yeah, we have a whole backlog of songs that are kind of like in the no category, just because they sound too they just don't sound Ginkgo-y enough, they're a little too experimental or whatever.
Would you guys ever release those songs maybe in like a special kind of EP or something?
We're not, every artist, after a certain point in their longevity tends to break out and sort of do things that maybe a record label wouldn't let them do, or that doesn't sound. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely a possibility. That's definitely a possibility. I guess we're more with creating the songs and writing the music. I don't think it's necessarily right now on the front burner, but definitely something we've talked about, even, and when there's we have a joke, for some of the songs that we write that don't really fit in necessarily with what Ginkgo is doing. We have a joke that when we're old and famous, we can release those songs, because those will be like, we'll have the freedom that at that point, with our fans in ways, like to be able
to. So you talked a little bit about the compromise when you're making your music, but can you talk a little bit about how you both, kind of work on that? Because you're a duo, so it's, you have the two opinions. How do you kind of deal with making sure that you both feel heard?
We start by just not listening to each other, right? So we can just say whatever we want at that point, because it doesn't really matter. No,
we hate each other, but we make good music. We don't. On camera, we haven't wrung each other's neck yet.
That's good.
So no. yeah. Or in the studio. That's a sacred space. We're fortunate in that at least the outerlying vision that we both have with this genre seems to be the same. We like a lot of the same stuff. There's some artists or sounds that he's more into than I am, and vice versa. And we're kind of, you can tell when we communicate with each other privately, like what excites us and what we're malaise about. But there's definitely a common ground, which helps. I try to be as descriptive with what I'm hoping the song to convey and sound like as I can, to prevent those sort of arguments from happening, and vice versa. And so we just kind of we communicate about it constantly. And I'll say, like as we're recording, it will be, you know, whatever the audio. So we're in the studio session after session, and then we'll send each other the M4As of what we have and go through and be like, well, this guitar sounds, you know, not even talking about volume levels and anything in terms of EQ or anything like that, but just like the actual musicianship. Maybe my vocals sound strange in one part. I think they're strange. He thinks they're not, you know, or the opposite. We just want to make sure that we're on the same page. So it's just communicating throughout the process. But I have to say, I'm really grateful because a lot of the more specifically maybe bizarre ideas, I think, that I've had, he's been on board with, which I appreciate. And another example is a song we have called Department Store Chic, which came out in April 2022. And at the end of that song, there's like a spoken word thing. It's an outro of me speaking and mentioning these different brands of department store clothing lines. And, you know, it sounds silly, but it's playful and it's supposed to be a little bit sensual and seductive, even though it's playful. And Ben was totally on board. And I thought he was going to be like, no, that's weird. Like, what does that even mean? You know, so I'm grateful
well,
for
when
that.
we were doing the scratch vocals to that song, I think you laid down some Barry White-esque, oh girl, why don't you come over? You know, like one of these things. It's a very slow, bluesy, kind of seductive song. And so, you know, to get the is it Barry? Did I say that right? Or is it Isaac Hayes who I'm thinking of? Anyway.
Yeah. Well, both of those guys, but Barry White's voice is like yeah. I can't get there, unfortunately.
I'm so in love with you. I got to practice my bass voice.
Oh,
but yeah, he just did that thing, and I thought that would, you know, as a joke, you know, it wasn't even supposed to go in the song, and you know, it was one of those things that we had listened to in the scratch vocal sessions, you know, and when we're listening to these songs back and they got scratch vocals in them, and a lot of times it's just mumbling, because, you know, we'll have a song and then we'll just kind of mumble, you know, these words, and then that's what he did, and you know, I thought it sounded really good. Like, it's sort of ironically, you know, it's kind of like, it's funny to hear, and so, you know, it helps to not take yourself so seriously all the time and just throw something kind of comical in there. I think it really kind of helps to humble us a little bit, you know. Sometimes I feel like, you know, we can head into this whole direction sometimes of like we can head in, we I think naturally tend to head into directions that, you know, you don't want to necessarily double down on. You just want to kind of, I don't know what I'm trying to say. A lot of everybody sort of, you know, it's one of these things where like, you know, I guess we sort of put ourselves in check in a way to try to, you know, like, what am I going to try to say? So there have been times when the you know, the music or the lyrical content might sound, and this is one area where we sort of critique each other, where the lyrical content might sound a little too cocky or seductive, and we want to try to kind of try to sort of you know, bring that back, you know, just kind of, you know, and one way of really kind of being more vulnerable, humbling ourselves a little bit more, just throw some comedy in there, you know, or something. Just don't take yourself too seriously. And I think that kind of, when we talk about it, when we sort of hash those things out, I think those ideas definitely come through in our music a lot more cohesively, if that makes sense.
Yeah, confident but not cocky, for sure. The guy who shot the album cover, Adam Godson's, for our 2020 EP, I think it was when we were shooting that, someone who was there on set, or maybe it was shortly after that, mentioned that you know, we're hanging out outside of an apartment building pool, like an apartment complex pool, which is like, we're fun, but obviously we're not millionaires.
The pool was empty too.
Yeah,
Remember, it was during a time when the pool was emptied. So
yeah, yeah, so it was kind of exactly that made it even better. And we have some B-roll photos from that we still have to release. But that whole thing, people were happy that we're not, holding wads of money in front of the Lamborghini or something like.
Although that we'll
yeah.
still talk about
And
but that's I mean, I think that we should use that for our next EP, but we'll talk about that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that'd be. We weren't supposed to say that here and now, but now there you go.
It's
You
official.
guys got the scoop.
We're just trying to make it official. Yeah.
Well, it's official
Yeah,
now.
Yeah, we can't go back.
Yeah.
Soundtrack of our lives broke the news,
It's too
ladies
late now.
and gentlemen.
Or what is your main goal right now as a duo? Where you guys wanna get with your music and
Well, so focusing on Balloon Duty, we have this incredible press junket going on, obviously, and thank you so much to Erica Derora and Gioia Communications. My Italian is not very good, but thanks to them for making this happen, this interview happen, and really supporting and elevating what we believe the EP to be. So there's that in the immediate future, obviously, and focusing on the release. We want to get a release party together. Ben, we have to talk about that. Whatever that means, is a release party, a release show. But we have a twofold things that we're really, really focusing on. One is expanding the reach of our music to TV and film. Really want to try to get it to a massive audience of ears, but emphasize how it could be used in media, because a lot of our stuff, I think, is very youthful, and there's a lot of TV shows right now that emphasize youth issues, and it's also good causes that we would be a part of. We would help the big shedding of light on whatever it is the Zoomers or younger than that are going through these days. So that would be something that would be cool, but I'm trying to work on that as much as I can, and Ben and I are in communication about it every day when we get a meeting with a music supervisor or something like that. So that's exciting. The other thing is, and Ben, you can if you object or anything you want to add to this, I really would still like. Exactly. Yeah. I'd love for us to go on a tour in the fall, but we love performing live, but it is hard with 5 people who have very separate lives outside of Ginkgo. And by the way, I personally interchange the words duo and band, but contextually they mean the same thing.
It's a group.
When it comes to performing.
It's a group.
Yeah, it's a group.
It's an ensemble. Can you
We're
call
all
two
each
people a
other's
group? I mean,
ensemble.
this is
You can call whatever you want.
Okay, cool. Cool.
I like outfit.
Outfit and operation. Yeah.
Collective. Yeah.
Yeah.
Collective could be a little
Sounds like
ominous
more like
and
a cult.
scary,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Again, it sounds like
we're
more
part of
than
the
2 people.
Freemasons, but
Maybe I'm wrong on that.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, we're always working on the next thing, and we're back in the studio, or about to be right now, for some new songs. But personally, for me, I just don't want us to spin wheels. It's like, let's not do the same thing in a different way we did 2 years ago, 3 years ago. We have to advance it in some larger capacity. Yeah. So
how do you make sure that the music you are making now doesn't sound too similar to what you just released or what you already made? Because you want to keep your sound, but you don't want to sound exactly the same all the time.
Yeah. Well, our music, one good thing about that, one way we kind of stay clear of that, is our music tends to bend genres anyways. So one song and the next song might not even sound sometimes, unless you can hear, before the vocals kick in, because vocals oftentimes will, define a music. It'll sort of compartmentalize all that music to be the Ginkgo sound. And then also the instruments that are used also, and the tones that are used. So bending genres, what good thing about bending genres slightly, and we try to say slightly, I try to bend them slightly, not go too far away from, what our genre is. But one way of doing that is to sort of break sort of, not to pigeonhole ourselves into one particular sort of sound. So, if there's ever a sound I'm working on that sounds really good in a particular instrument, I don't have to just switch that instrument because that instrument doesn't sound Ginkgo Balboa enough, because we could always make it sound Ginkgo Balboa, in a different instrument, with maybe vocals or with something. So it gives us a chance to sort of experiment with different sounds. If you have two songs that sort of use a lot of the same instruments, a lot of the same sounds, you can also kind of change one sound out and experiment, with a sound or two, that way it keeps it in that whole Ginkgo Balboa, style, but also we can sort of deviate from that and expand on what Ginkgo Balboa means, musically.
Yeah, I think any real musician or writer is not going to run out of ideas, even if there's sometimes a stalemate where you need to, just process things and not force your, creative, the way in which you approach it. So we're never going to make a song that sounds exactly like one we've made before, but a good way for us to stay fresh is to, it's funny, I think the biggest thing we offer musically that people talk about is both one of the positive things and negative things, which is we are very expansive, we bend genres, but sometimes the negative side of that is that people don't really need that much to listen to music and enjoy it. Like, overcomplicating a song musically might really impress your musician friends, maybe we're the musician's musician, I'm not calling myself a musician per se, but like the group together, like, it's like, oh,
called them themselves musicians before, so
yeah, maybe we have that appeal a little bit, but sometimes it's like, well, does it even make a difference if it makes it less danceable or less accessible? Because we can be accessible without selling our souls too. We don't have to make terrible vanilla music, but we can also be fun to hear over and
most
over
of most of my real musician
that
friends
goes both ways.
consider our music to be selling out, so maybe we're on the right track in that aspect.
Yeah, there you go. It's like you still can't compare us to top 40 radio. There's just no way.
Nor would we want that.
Not to disparage
and nor
those people,
would we want that. We're not trying to make top 40 music. We're just trying to make music that's more accessible than prog rock, which is a musician's genre,
Yeah. What do you feel most proud of like what you've accomplished right now?
Oh, yeah. What are we most proud of?
Those are probably separate answers. I was thinking about this right before we went on air. Someday I want to have a giant picture, like a collage of the artwork from every single album, EP, single we've ever released. Partially as a retrospective and just like, wow, that was an incredible chapter of my life. Not that, I'm not foreshadowing it ending, or nor does it have to end. The frustrating thing would be, well, how do I add it to this beautiful collage? Now that, we made a new song 10 years later, now I got to add to it, or whatever. No, I mean, the artwork, which most of Ben has made himself, is beautiful, I think, that we released with our songs. But even just looking at those as a collective would help bring into perspective what we've done across the board, on stage, in the studio, music videos, fans, etc. So for me, it's I'm really proud of our marketing and our bundling of it, and that's such a white knuckle answer to a fun question. So let me see if I can make it less boring. Selfishly, I'm proud of a lot of the writing that I've had and vocal melodies that I've had that we've been able to implement. Department Store Chic, we've already talked about at length, but that's a good example. Just my narrative driven style of songwriting, which is, usually how I approach all of my writing, because I like things to be cemented in time and the memory and experiences of things. I'm proud that people have been receptive to that. And Ben, of course, being the first person, since we need to, have that assembly line process of getting it out to people, and it starts with us. So just in retrospect, just grateful that that's something that works and people are able to find their own meanings from and connect with.
Yeah,
So
the what you brought up about the artwork, that was awesome, because I feel like sometimes the artwork sort of it can be underrated sometimes. It kind of gets lost, and the recognition of the art gets lost sometimes with everything that we're doing. So thanks for the shout out on that. But I think personally, yeah, and Mike does a lot of the sort of band business, a lot of the social media and stuff, and he does a really great job at that. And I think that's something that's always been missing in the past with my past bands too. It's just kind of that social media presence, although social media then was a little raw, more raw than it is now. But I'd say the biggest thing that I'm probably, well, not the biggest thing, but one thing I'm really proud of is how we've been able to sort of adapt, having just different influences, and being able to really kind of dive into this genre or dive into this style of music, and kind of keep, I feel like, at least hold our own. Like sometimes it's hard to really, if somebody asked me if I wanted to write give me a jazz song, or give me I don't know, an R&B song, like a 90s R&B song, and I want it next week, there's a lot of intimidation there. But I think that, like, I've always been able to do different genres, so not a lot, but like at the same time, it's a challenge. And I think Ginkgo Balboa has really kind of challenged both of us to sort of evolve and be able to adapt that way.
Totally.
What is your earliest memory involving music? Obviously, this is like a separate question.
If you can remember.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
I'm gonna go out on a limb and say I can't remember. No, not to age ourselves at all. My earliest memory of being a musician. Well, my dad, I come from, and so does Mike's family, but I come from a very musical family. So my dad played in bands, cover bands and whatnot, and church bands and stuff like that, all growing up, all through my childhood. And so a lot of my early memories were of that, me just kind of getting, the youngest I can be, getting on my dad's guitar and just kind of strumming it without actually playing anything, any notes. And also he gave me this old it was like this Yamaha keyboard. It was like it was like I'm wanting to say like not a 49 key keyboard. It was like the next, what is that, 30 some odd keys. Anyways, do the math. 49 minus 12. It was that many keys. And so, and it had these little, it was this old Yamaha, but it had these little Casio tones. So that you press a button and you get this really basic, really simple drum beats and stuff like that. And I would, I was,
yes, I remember those.
6, 7 years old, and maybe even younger than that, and just writing. I remember writing a few songs, and my dad had this reel-to-reel tape recorder back then that he pulled out. It was this old like Radio Shack, like realistic brand reel-to-reel. And so it was like a 2-track, so you could play 2 tracks over each other. And I used to mess around with that when I was a kid and record these pop songs as a 6-year-old. And they were my brother's. I have one song. It was my hit, and by hit I mean everyone in my family seemed to like it. My immediate family, and it's called Simon's Boogie Woogie, which my brother is Simon, my youngest brother Simon. It was written about him because he would dance to my music, And and so this one, there was a song that was called Simon's Doing the Boogie Woogie. Yeah. He would yeah, that's the first time I think I've told that story to anyone outside of my family. He would not approve of me telling that story. Maybe he would. Who knows?
For me, it's dad driven too. Like he said, that's our journeys are parallel in that way. Very, very, very musical families. Like my dad is like a locally respected, semi-famous guitarist, Bruce Bednarsky, outside of New York City. And the house I grew up in was a revolving door for guitar students. So thankfully my ears were always open. So I was hearing everything from the sounds of the time to metal, like, the kind of genres you expect aspiring guitar players to play, a lot of metal, a lot of like 80s rock, and just like the most seminal riffs. So I've heard obviously Smoke on the Water a billion times, so there was that. But we would drive around. He would play a lot of blues and jazz. I fell in love with blues from an early age because of that. I remember being very, very young, listening to Clapton, probably Stevie Ray Vaughan, and what was that? Pride and Joy. Like I remember hearing Pride and Joy by Slow Hand. When we were just driving around, it must have been 5, 6 years old, getting fast food. There was a place called Dutch's, which, because we're getting silly and really personal. Shout out to Dutch's, man. I think they're only in Connecticut.
They got me through a lot of hard times.
And their hot dogs are so good. Yeah. He would always get them a specific way with the works cut in half. Well done. It was like a very specific order. And I remember him like wrapping up there's a wrapper from the Dutch's hot dog, and he just like crumpled it up. And I remember hearing Pride and Joy at the same time, just being like 5 or 6 years old, and we're running errands, probably going to the hardware store and Banco's, and now defunct but really important music instrument shop, and I think they had a luthier there. So I remember, for me, it's like, even when it doesn't involve the actual music making, it's all the elements of it. My dad's he's an eccentric person, and the studio where he had the students come in, it's just guitar picks and pedals everywhere on the floor, Guitar World magazine stacked real high, a piano with different, tuners and on it, and different devices, Ernie ball strings all over the place. So very, very, it was me, the experience as well as the music, but a lot of jazz and blues. And then I'm the youngest of 3 boys, and my oldest brother, both of my brothers, actually, older brothers, were pursuing acting and musical theater from a young age. And my dad would play in the pit for a lot of those shows. So I grew up on 42nd Street and Oliver Twist and those types of things. So I definitely think, even though I rejected that for some time later in my hip hop years, I think every single genre, especially being exposed to all of it so young, was really, really crucial for my personal development, musically and otherwise. So
Those are wonderful stories.
Thank you. Yeah, those are good questions.
Okay, and then our last question is, what is the soundtrack of your life?
Does it have to be one song, or can it be a collection of songs?
Yeah, it can be a collection, it can be albums, it can be anything.
You can also answer it separately or together.
Yeah, well, that changes so much, Soundtrack of my life, and my life has gone through various rebirths and stuff. So that definitely changes.
Yeah, same. That's like the best closing question. I'm guessing that's like your tag. That's the best question ever for a music podcast.
I can say at one point in time, I was going through a divorce, and forget what album it is, by Tame Impala was on, and it's got the Less I Know the Better and all those songs. I
think Lonerism was one of their albums. I think that was 2012. So it was the one after that. Currents. You're talking about Currents.
It's Currents. That album was it had been out for a couple years, but I listen to it here and there, but then I kind of revisited it while I was going through a divorce, and it just every one of those songs spoke to me, and I considered that to be the soundtrack of my life at that point in time, because a lot of those songs were about life changes and going through change and breakups and whatnot. And I find those sometimes every time I go through a big giant life change. I always find there will always be one group of music, whether that's an album or a band's entire catalog or just maybe a playlist. Every time I go through a life change, I always those and one of the things I really love about music is this: you can hear music and it just kind of speaks to you for the time that you're going through it, and I think that's when you really find your best inspirations, when you find your best. It's almost like the universe telling you you're on the right track in a way, because the music actually is communicating with you, telling you that, saying, hey, listen, like that album in general, when I was going through a divorce, was really saying, look, like I'm going through it too, like we can go through this together, and I felt like I had like, as corny as it sounds, felt like I had a friend in the music.
Yeah. Well, let me just say, this is like a can of worms to me. Like, I literally, a quick anecdote, I have some people close to me that are not too far. They live in the San Diego area that are getting ready to move. And for the ride down to visit them and back to LA, I made a list of one song that reminded me of every time I went to visit them, because I have a weird memory like that. It's episodic, and it might sound lame, but it's like, oh, I remember this song represents December 2020, and then this song represents May 2021, and they're all there and on a Spotify playlist, and they're chronological to me, even though the songs came out whenever they came out. So I think in those ways. So I really appreciate this question. Yeah. But the soundtrack of my life is always changing, but I'm going to use one of my favorite bands. They're called Horse Beach, HORSEBEACH. It's exactly how it sounds. People probably could have figured that out, but one word, Horse Beach. They're from England, and they're a current band. They're like mid to late 2010s, but I still considered, because I've lived in Los Angeles all that time, I consider that's where we're at now to still be like an extension of that part of my life. And that was the band that, when I reflect on how I met Ben and what we were doing, spending a lot of time in both LA and Ventura County, just long days in the sun and being around sand and dirt and 2-day-old beer and all these incredible experiences that we've had, and just, I don't know, their music, I can put their discography on shuffle and enjoy the whole thing. And every single year around spring and summer, I do that. And there aren't a lot of bands I can do that with, especially years that go by. You get older and you don't feel the same way about those bands anymore. It's like a chapter of your life, or you're beyond it. Not that you've grown out of it, but maybe in some cases that is what happens. So I'm going to say just the discography by Horse Beach. If I ever move out of Southern California, I'll be like, that's my California band right there, even though they're not even from the United States. So Horse Beach, if you're listening, any of you guys, we'd love to go on the road with you and open for you. Ben's like, what? I didn't say that. No.
There's a lot of those European bands that sound like they're from California. Yeah, it's a vibe. It's a total vibe. California is a continent in and of itself. I never feel like sometimes.
That's true. So yeah, thank you guys for coming. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Before we finish, do you guys want to share your social media or anything that you want listeners to go and check out?
Yeah, all of our social medias across the board are at Ginkgo Balboa Band. That's the @ GINKGO Balboa Band, all one word. If you go to our website, which is basically just a domain, ginkgobalboa.com, GINKGO Balboa.com, you can pick where to hear us or watch our music videos. Don't forget to like, subscribe, add our songs to the playlist, please. That all helps.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much. Okay, thank you, Mike and Ben, for coming and talking to us. It's been a pleasure. We're excited for everyone to go and listen to your new EP. Listeners, go check it out and make sure to subscribe and follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at STO Lives Podcast. Thanks for joining us.